Earlier this year, the government celebrated reaching its target for reducing the number of people in emergency housing a full 5 years early. As part of the policy, they prioritised moving families with children to the top of the social housing list. But in August, they also introduced stricter rules. So if someone is judged to have contributed to their situation, they don't get emergency assistance. As winter bites, I sat down with Minister Tama Potaka and asked him about the impact of the changes.
Well, first and foremost, we think emergency housing was a moral catastrophe. It was a real problem. Many children live in emergency housing. At the peak, over about 5,000 whānau households. And of course, when I became the Associate Minister of Housing, there were over 3,000 children living in emergency housing, actually in hotels and motels in places like Ulster Street, Hamilton, Fenton Street in Rotorua, and right throughout the country. As a result of setting a target to reduce the number of whānau and households living in emergency housing by 75% in 6 years, I got to work with various teams in the support of my government and of course the Prime Minister. And we reduced the number of whānau living in emergency housing from about 3,100 down to about 500 today. Nearly 3,000 kids come out of hotels and motels. There's still a lot of work to do. We haven't resolved or solved the housing crisis. But in terms of the emergency housing, we have reduced the number of people living there. And of course, one of the consequences is that instead of paying $33 million a month, now there's about $3 million a month that goes into paying for emergency housing.
So when you changed the eligibility criteria for emergency housing in August of last year, your officials explicitly warned that the changes could lead to an increase in homelessness. The MSD advice said this, quote, "Making these changes ahead of significant increases to the supply of affordable housing and more preventative wraparound supports does create a risk of increased levels of rough sleeping, people living in cars and overcrowding." So has changing the emergency housing policy increased homelessness?
Look, we acknowledge that there's some real concerns and real issues with people living without shelter and rough sleeping, not just in places like Hamilton, but right throughout the country. It's a real challenge for a lot of people, and homelessness isn't just about building a house and enabling that person to move in the house, but there are other issues and other challenges, for example, mental health and well-being, drug and alcohol addictions, the cost of living, the economic crisis, and also some of the physical health challenges that go with it. What this government has done is, over and above the focus on emergency housing, we've also committed to supporting community housing providers, so another 1,500 community housing provider houses over the next couple of years, and they actually provide a lot of wraparound support, and that's what a lot of people who are facing those challenges really need. We continue to support Māori housing too, so places like Ngāti Whakaue tribal lands over in Rotorua, they've been building houses over there by the Rotorua airport, supporting them to build houses for people, Kiwis, Māori, in genuine need.
So to my question though, has changing that policy led to an increase in homelessness?
Well, homelessness, as I said, is not just about housing and it's not just about emergency housing. And we acknowledge...
Just to my question though, has changing that policy and changing the eligibility for emergency housing, as you did in August of last year, has that contributed to an increase in homelessness?
Look, there are some reports that there's an increase in rough sleeping and living without shelter.
As a result of that policy?
No, those reports also say, just like the Homelessness Insights briefing that I've just received, say that actually there's a whole range of potential causes, including that, but a whole range of other things like mental health, as I mentioned.
Okay, so the changes that you introduced in August of last year coincided with a big increase in the percentage of applications for emergency housing that were being rejected and a big drop in the total number of emergency housing grants. So they fully came into effect at the end of August. Between September and January, Auckland Council's Community Impact team recorded a 53% increase in the number of people living in cars, parks or the streets. On page 3 of the Housing and Urban Development Homelessness Report from December, it says this, quote, "Providers across the country report increasing levels of homelessness." What evidence do you have that homelessness rates have not increased directly as a result of that policy?
Well, the same people who are providing the information for various reports are also reporting actually it's not just one cause, there's a whole range of things, and that's why I say homelessness is not just about a house, but it's about a range of challenges that many people in genuine need are facing.
So my question is one of those contributing factors your decision to change eligibility for emergency housing? Do you acknowledge that?
No, I definitely acknowledge there's a massive problem with housing and homelessness. And again, with housing, there's simply not enough houses. And
No,
that's
I understand that. So my question though is, you say there's a range of contributing factors to reports of increasing homelessness across the country. My question is whether tightening up the eligibility for emergency housing, as you did in August of last year, if that is one of the contributing factors.
That's a very strong view that many people have. And what I'd say is this also, Jack, that where people have a genuine need for short-term stay and temporary accommodation in most towns and cities in New Zealand, emergency housing is available. There is a responsibility framework that goes with that, but emergency housing is available.
So it's a strong view that many people hold that your policy has led to an increase in homelessness. What's your view?
Well, I think there's a range of factors.
What's your view?
Well, my view is this, is that where people have a genuine need for short-term stay and temporary accommodation in most towns and cities in New Zealand, there continues to be emergency housing available. And we continue, as taxpayers, you and me, Jack, through the government, to put $500 million a year into things like Housing First, rapid rehousing, transitional, and a whole range of other initiatives to really help those people in genuine need.
Yes, you're talking about those policies and your efforts to increase the housing supply, but I just want a really straight answer on this. Do you acknowledge that changing eligibility for emergency housing, as you did in August of last year, has contributed to an increase in homelessness?
This is what I acknowledge, that there's a range of factors that influence it, and the changes to the emergency housing policy have been reported by many people as being a contributor.
And what is your view as the minister responsible? Among those that range of factors, do you acknowledge that your policy has contributed to an increase in homelessness?
This is my view, Jack. There are a range of factors. People have said that the policy is part of that, but there are also a range of responses, and we're really dedicated to trying to build more houses and to enable people that have that genuine need actually to get into a proper home with the pastoral support that they need. People like Te Rūnanga, Kirikiriroa, the Wise Group and others who do some fantastic work here in Hamilton West and elsewhere throughout the country.
So emergency housing, as you mentioned, was costing New Zealand about $1 million a day at its peak demand.
Yes.
You said that about 80% of those who've been moving out of emergency housing were going to better, more permanent solutions.
We know it's a little bit more than that, but the vast majority.
How many
It's
more?
about 85 to 86% in the
what's
most
happening-
recent months.
What's happening with the other 14 to 15%?
Well, people don't have to tell us where they're going, where they're living when they leave emergency housing, but we know with those people, because many of them move to social housing or to transitional housing, we know where they've gone. What we also know too is through the policy that we introduced around Priority 1, making sure children came out of emergency housing, that we fast-tracked them into better homes. About 1,000 families and over 2,000 children have come out more quickly out of emergency housing as a result of that Priority 1.
Yeah, if your policy settings have allowed for 85% of people on that list to go to better, more permanent housing solutions, but risks some of that remaining 15% ending up rough sleeping or sleeping on the streets. Is that a good policy?
Well, I think what you'll recognise, Jack, is when we came into administration, the teams knew where around 50% of people were going. Now we know where there is about 85, 86% of where people are going. And in my view, that's actually good progress. We don't know where everyone's going, and maybe some of those people that have left and we don't know where they're going, they're in a difficult spot, and we need to get out there and support those people.
So to my question though, is it worth it? Is the policy successful if ultimately, while moving the majority of people into better, more permanent solutions, it's also contributing to an increase in homelessness?
Well, what I'd say is that we set up a target. That target was to reduce the number of whānau and households living in emergency housing. We've reached the target, but we've also recognised there are still some challenges and some issues, and that's why we've got these other responses going on.
Yeah, so you've set up a target, but if an unintended consequence of your policy is that more people are on the streets in the middle of winter, is it a successful policy?
Well, no one wants to see people on the streets in the middle of winter, and that's why we've got nearly $500 million going into programs to support those people.
Again, I want to share with you some quotes from that December Housing and Urban Development report, which said, quote, heard consistent concern it's more difficult for people in urgent and genuine housing need to get emergency housing grants, and that a consistent theme of feedback from providers is, quote, increasing levels of homelessness. Providers believe this may be due to changes to emergency housing. You mentioned some of those community providers beforehand. Is there any community provider in New Zealand that says homelessness is not increasing?
I talk to a lot of community providers, not just the ones here in Hamilton West, but people like Comcare down in Christchurch, the Salvation Army, Emerge, many community housing providers, and including some of the Māori community housing providers like Toitū Tairāwhiti out in Gisborne and out on the East Coast. and all of them recognise there's a massive issue with housing generally, including those that are living without shelter. And that's why we're so
to the question though, can you point to any community provider in New Zealand that says homelessness numbers are not increasing?
Well, community housing providers, one of their raison d'etre is actually established those community housing providers to help those with genuine housing concern, including those who are homeless or living without shelter.
To my question though, can any community service providers in New Zealand that you interact with, can any of them say that homelessness numbers in their patch are not increasing?
I have not talked with all the community housing providers, but the ones that I've talked to have said, hey, there's a real big issue with those living without shelter and those living in shelter but uninhabitable housing and overcrowding and a range of other challenges. And that's why we respond with things like supporting Māori housing, like supporting the people up in Northland. I was in Northland yesterday with the Prime Minister talking to iwi leaders. Some huge work going on by Te Hauora o Ngāpuhi, Tia Ashbury and others in place helping people find a home in Kaikohe. Very, very tough place, a lot of housing challenges, but we continue to support those community housing providers.
You've got the latest version of that Housing and Urban Development homelessness
I just received
report.
the final report last week.
You haven't yet published it publicly, although that will be coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it show an increase in homelessness?
It does recognise throughout the country there are community housing providers, councils who are saying, hey, there's a big challenge with homelessness.
An increase, just to be totally clear, an increase in homelessness?
In some areas, yes, and it's not down just to one thing, there's a whole range of causes.
But does that report suggest that one of the contributing factors is potentially the changes you've made to emergency
Those
housing?
are the reports that we are getting. Those are the anecdotal reports that we're getting. That there's
Minister,
a major
what does
links.
it say about your policy that heading into the middle of winter, you are celebrating an emergency housing policy that your own officials say is contributing to an increase in homelessness?
What they're saying is we've got a whole range of causes.
You've just told me that one of those causes is your own policy.
No, what I've said is that there are anecdotal reports that say there are a range of causes, and they also
including your own policy?
They report that the emergency housing policy is very, very harsh. That's what some of the anecdotal reports are saying.
And you think this policy is a success?
No, our target is not a policy. Our target is reducing the amount of whānau and households living in emergency housing.
You've certainly done that, but it sounds like you've also put more people on the street.
Hey, those are the things that we have acknowledged that there are some challenges, and we are responding to those with agility.
When will you release that report?
Soon.
Let's talk conservation.
Absolutely. So a great place, iconic, Jack. I know that you go out walking sometimes too, mate.
I do,
out on the
occasionally.
Estate.
Got young kids though, so yes.
Maybe you and I should go for a run together down at the Rootburn or somewhere like that.
I think you'll be leaving me in the dust. So combining...
Never leave anyone behind, especially a media personality.
Combining departmental and non-departmental spending, DOC's budget appropriations have been substantially cut under your government and are forecast by DOC to continue going down through to 2029 in real and nominal terms. Is cutting DOC's funding in the interest of environmental stewardship?
Look, people throughout the country are really invested in environmental stewardship. I had the chance to visit a place called the Isaacs Conservation and Wildlife Trust recently, just outside the Christchurch Airport. Fantastic place. They've got a quarry going on, they've got a dairy farm that's adjacent to a couple of golf courses, but they're also reinvesting in the preservation and support for endangered species like the kaki, the black stilt, or the kakariki karaka, the orange parakeet, and these little guys, shore plovers, tuturuatu. So there are people who are investing their own money and spending their own time and their own energy trying to improve the environment and trying to save some of these many endangered species that we have. There have been some reductions in government allocation through DOC, but there's also been some increases. So you would notice the international visitor levy has helped with conservation.
You did a funding switch for that though.
No, but we've raised the international visitor levy to $100.
Yes, but
and by the way, Australians don't pay, but we've got something coming for them and others too. So we've increased some of the funding, we've reduced some of the funding, but we are very, very focused also in making sure we reset the conservation system to make it easier for people like you and me and our children to get out and enjoy the estate.
So more than 3/4 of New Zealand's native birds, reptiles, bats and freshwater fish are threatened with extinction or at risk of becoming threatened species. What specific biodiversity outcome will this government be able to point to at the end of this term that shows real improvement?
Well, first of all, absolutely acknowledge we've got a lot of endangered species, about 4,500 actually, and some of them are at real low levels, like the tareati, there's about 50 of those little guys. So we have done things in order to focus on predator control, to focus on pest control. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, I announced a big funding investment into predator control throughout the country, and to killing off a few goats down at the Kaimai Mamaku and Wanganui National Park.
So would that be the biggest outcome you think at the end of this term, would say there are fewer goats?
Well, that is one good outcome, because goats absolutely destroy
but
the environment in which these endangered species live.
Of course. I mean, pest control is
Yeah.
absolutely central to New Zealand's biodiversity goals, right? But would that be the best outcome that you can point to at the end of this term?
Well, the first thing is we're going through conservation reform. We want to reset the Conservation Act to support the economy, but also to support the environment. It's just hard to do things sometimes on the conservation estate, and so, you know, the things that we're doing in that space, they take some time, but they're moving. We've also gone out with the Predator 2050 and biodiversity, Aotearoa New Zealand biodiversity strategy for feedback. We need to reset those and make sure that actually there's some buy-in to those things.
Regarding that strategy, the National Biodiversity Strategy, according to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, New Zealand is, quote, highly unlikely to meet its 2030 targets under your plan. So what doesn't former National Minister Simon Upton understand?
Well, we're going out for some feedback
That's
to
the
reset.
feedback. That's the feedback he gave. He submitted that. He said, your plan that you've put forward for feedback would mean that New Zealand is highly unlikely to meet its 2030 biodiversity
Well, that's exactly
target.
the type of feedback that we need to receive. So if we have to reset
What does it say
we will.
about your plan?
No,
The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment
It's a draft
is saying
strategy.
that.
It's a draft strategy.
Well, it's a draft strategy that doesn't achieve our goals, according to your former National Minister.
We welcome that feedback, and we might have to change the strategy accordingly. That's why we go out and consult with people, Jack. Get their feedback.
So you've prioritised the fast-track legislation. You've
Yes.
repealed Te Mane o Te Wai. Some of your cabinet colleagues have been outspoken about promoting extractive industries. Can you name one significant environmental decision made by this government that prioritised nature over business?
The Hauraki Gulf Marine Protection Bill. Let's start there.
Okay.
So for many, many years, governments have tried to sort that. The last government, of course, they tried, but they couldn't get over the line. We've reached a policy decision to go out and basically triple the protection in the Hauraki Gulf, a place of serious iconic significance for us as Kiwis, and of course people who live or enjoy Auckland, and there's quite a few of us Kiwis that do that, enjoy Auckland. So I think that that's a huge decision. The government's made a decision. We're going to go ahead and triple the protection in the Hauraki Gulf, and very soon it'll come back through the House for final readings.
So the best example you can give me of your government prioritising nature over business is a policy where, against official advice, you provided a carve-out so that commercial fishermen can continue to operate in an otherwise protected area.
I think that that's a very, very small part of the overall tripling of protection.
Your official advice,
tripling of protection.
Your official advice said that commercial fishers operating in the Gulf would, quote, undermine biodiversity outcomes, and the best example you can give me is one in which you rejected that advice so that commercial fishers could continue to operate in a protected area.
I think it's a very small number of commercial fishers in a very small area, but the overall picture is this, Jack, is that we will triple the protection for the Hauraki Gulf, and I think that that's an absolutely fantastic thing. And as someone who had experience operating and working in the Hauraki Gulf, looking after Motu Tapuana Motu Tapua Taikihu, someone who was involved in Rangitoto, Ngā Pona Toru a Peretu, someone who was involved in running tourism operations, whale watch and dolphin sightings out in the Hauraki Gulf, I'm a very proud New Zealander to say that, yes, we will triple the protection in that place.
When Fisheries Minister Shane Jones spoke to Q&A, he told us that he thinks, in his view, there is, quote, no such thing as a Maui dolphin. What's your view?
Well, Minister Jones has some very strong views, and I acknowledge Minister Jones and his views, but I do believe that there is a Maui dolphin, and there's a range of other species that we have to go out and try and protect, and that's why I'm so focused on supporting organisations like the Manaaki Ruahine folks down in Mokopātea, a place in the world very special to me, like others out up at Raukumara Pai Maunga, who are shooting goats and possums and all sorts of things up there on the East Coast. We are really focused on supporting people because we know that the environment and the economy goes together, but toi tū te whenua, toi tū te moana.
You've talked about opening up more of the conservation estate for commercial enterprise. Where do you think the greatest opportunity is for that?
I think there's a huge opportunity in tourism, especially where there's a cultural bent. I absolutely love what the Ngāi Tahu Tourism Kaupapa stands for, but also intersecting with a lot of other people in those parts of Te Waipanama, a beautiful place like Real NZ, like Ultimate Hikes, and others who are running tourism operations throughout the conservation estate. Absolutely, I see that as a place where decision making needs to be bit more efficient, bit more effective, but we also have to get out there and unleash the pristine and iconic wilderness spots and beautiful places, majestic places across the country to host international manuhiri, to host international guests, but also our own people. When you take out your children and I take out my children to nature, they click not only into the universe but to the innerverse. That's what I believe in.
Do you support more mining on conservation land?
Look, there are a lot of mines that already exist on conservation land. In the right place with the right provisions and environmental protections, it can be done, and it can be done in a defensible and credible way. But we have to make sure that those environmental protections are strong. There's trailing liability and a whole range of other protections around our tile. It's not a free-for-all, Jack, not at all.
But would you support more though?
Well, in the right place and with the right protections, that's an option. But I don't.
Is
think
it
it's
an
a
option
free.
that you would support?
Well, it is an option that's gone through the fast track, which you know about. So it is an option that I support, but not one where it goes out and destroys everything. That's not an option that I support, and you'll probably know, as I do, there are a lot of places around the country where there have been mines, hasn't necessarily worked properly. You might remember the Tui oil field out off the coast. You know, when you get into that space where you are intersecting with the environment, making sure the management of our interaction as humans with the environment needs protections, needs environmental protections.
The last time the Prime Minister was on Q&A, he said the Crown-Māori relationship had worsened during this term in government. Do you agree?
I think there's some real challenges, and that's why.
Do you agree with that sentiment? Just give us a clear answer on that.
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. You know, I went up to Northland, up to Te Tai Tokerau yesterday with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Treaty Waitangi Negotiations, Minister Goldsmith. We heard from a range of tribal leaders, people on the ground at the Flaxroots level that are trying to help the people. And what I found, again, is that a lot of the issues that our iwi leadership, Māori leadership, are very, very determined and passionate around, very similar issues to the ones that we're passionate around, whether or not that's the health delta that's affecting Māori, some of the health challenges, some of the education challenges, housing, and also developing our land in a way that can generate and contribute back to the economy. Absolutely, we're right there. So the dams and the water storage up north, connecting those up with Māori land to grow berries, to grow kiwi fruit, we're right behind that, we're right for that. I've got one good example though, Orako. It's a great place of historical significance, just half an hour away from here in Hamilton. You know, we went through the process to take that through from the time of John Key and Chris Finlayson. They said we're going to do it. Went through the Labour-led government, and it got to us, and we passed that into legislation so that land can be returned to the three iwi, Raukawa, Maniapoto and Waikato Tainui. A great example where I think actually the Māori Crown relationship strengthened. And so it was a moment of kotahitanga, and I look forward, and those are the sorts of moments that I want to have more of while I'm here in Parliament.
So you mentioned some of the health concerns. You voted to repeal the smoke-free generation tobacco laws, which researchers said would cost thousands of lives. Māori are disproportionately represented in those statistics. Do you accept that repealing that legislation will lead to more Māori deaths?
Well, I don't accept that completely, but what I do recognise, and what I do recognise...
What do you mean you don't recognise it completely?
No, I don't necessarily accept that, but what I know that I need to do is to make sure we hold Te Whatu Ora, Health New Zealand, and others to account, and that's part of the resetting that we've undertaken for Te Puni Kōkiri over the last year. Cabinet has agreed that one of the key statutory function of Te Puni Kōkiri is to monitor the performance of other agencies to improve health, education, economic development and training and employment.
You've gone a long way from smoke-free legislation here. Do you think changing those smoking laws will lead to more Māori deaths? I mean, health researchers all over the country, universities around the country, say that it's going to lead to more deaths, and of course Māori are overrepresented in those statistics. So why won't it lead to more Māori deaths?
But I don't know. But what I do know is
you just told me before that it wouldn't lead to more deaths.
No, I don't necessarily agree with that. What I'm saying is the job of Te Puni Kōkiri, which is my ministry, is to make sure we monitor and hold.
So you voted for that legislation, and you just talked about the Crown-iwi relationship and the importance of improving Māori health statistics. So it is your job. So explain to me why you don't agree that it will lead to more Māori deaths.
Well, I don't agree with that. That's not the intelligence that we've received as Cabinet. But what I want to say is this.
Sorry, no, I know what you want to say. What I want to ask though is that why it won't lead to more Māori deaths.
Well, I don't necessarily agree, but
You've made that clear, but just explain why.
I haven't thought about that to a great extent. What I've thought about
haven't thought about it.
Well, no,
It could potentially. I mean, health researchers say it could lead to thousands more deaths, and Māori are overrepresented in those, and you haven't thought about it.
No, what I've said is this: is that I don't necessarily agree with that, but what I need to do as the minister is to make sure that the department or the agency that I'm responsible, which is the Ministry for Māori Development, holds other agencies to account and ensures that there's appropriate data and evidence to report back on whether or not that's happening. And if it is, well, we've got a problem.
Why didn't you speak on the Treaty Principles Bill?
I spoke on the Treaty Principles many times, including on the tiles,
in
including
the
on
House,
TV.
In the House.
On which first, second, third reading?
Yeah.
Well, it didn't make it to third reading,
Yeah,
thankfully.
So why didn't you speak for the second?
Oh, that was a choice that was made by the whips ultimately. But I think everyone knew my position
did
on
you
it.
want-
I think everyone knew my
Did you want
position.
to speak?
I was happy to speak, but I think everyone knew my position on it too, Jack, and I'm sure you knew my position. Cremation day came and it was buried.
Yeah, I mean, you're a senior national minister, you're Minister for Crown Iwi Relations, Minister for Māori Development, and you didn't speak against what was obviously a contentious bill and one
Very contentious.
So why not express that in the House?
Well, I've expressed it on many occasions out of the House. Everyone knew my view, and I was happy to speak.
Yeah.
I didn't speak, but actually I knew the ultimate conclusion of that bill is it was going to be cremated and buried it was.
So the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples penned a letter to the government criticising the Regulatory Standards Bill, saying it fails to acknowledge tikanga or uphold principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Is he right?
Say that again, just ask that question again, please.
Sure. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples penned a letter to the government criticising the Regulatory Standards Bill and saying it fails to acknowledge tikanga or uphold principles of the treaty. Is he right?
Well, I don't think the Regulatory Standards Bill in its current form acknowledges tikanga, but I think that over all bills and over all acts, I have a very serious expectation that treaty responsibilities and rights are upheld.
So is the UN Special Rapporteur right in his criticism?
Well, in the current wording of the Regulatory Standards Bill, it does not mention tikanga and it does not mention the treaty principles, and that's actually a concern that many of my own colleagues, peers, even my daughter, have mentioned and said, hey, what's going on here? But I think we
Prime
also
Minister criticised his letter.
criticised.
That letter.
Yeah, I acknowledge the Prime Minister criticised that. What I'm saying is a lot of people have expressed their concerns to me over that, and it doesn't acknowledge tikanga. And in terms of treaty responsibilities and rights, I think that those are fundamental constitutional issues that actually sit over and above all legislation.
Will you vote for the Regulatory Standards Bill if it doesn't include a reference to the treaty?
Well, we haven't heard the report back from the Select Committee.
I know,
there
but if it doesn't have that
changes.
reference, yeah, it might, but if it doesn't have changes that would include a reference to the treaty, would you support it?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on my position in advance of what happens after the Select Committee report and any other changes that might be made. But what I will say is this, is that I believe, as does the National Party, that the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, is a foundational document, constitutional document for this country. That's what I believe in.
Finally, the government has scrapped Te Aka Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority. It's cutting Whānau Ora's baseline funding. Whai Kāinga, Whaioranga, the Iwi Housing Development Fund, has been reallocated. You've seen the government departments renamed so they don't have real Māori names. Section 788 scrapped. Tobacco changes, the biggest protest in New Zealand's history over a bill that you voted for in the first reading. I just wondered, at a personal level, have you ever questioned about whether or not, for all of the good that you think your government is doing, whether or not it might be outweighed by policies that are bad for Māori? Have you ever questioned that?
Look, I participate and engage on all issues that come before our Cabinet, that come through the National Party, and I'm very clear about what I stand for and the consistency of that, not only with the values of the National Party, but also the tikanga and the protocols that I live by. I'm a person that's very motivated by kotahitanga and the need to unify our country, and there's a lot of challenges in that space, as you've described. But I'm very, very focused on making sure that we continue to advance the mahi, the very good mahi that's been undertaken by iwi and Māori, the mahi that they undertake alongside government and other community groups, not only for Māori and tribal communities, actually, but for the region. You look at Tainui, what Tainui has done in this city, building the hotels here in Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, up in Mangere and Tāmaki Makaurau, the logistics hub out at Ruakura, the base, and also all the mahi that it does for its own people. If Māori and iwi are doing well, I really believe that communities, regions, and the country will do well. That's why when the Prime Minister says he wants New Zealand to be a small, advanced leading economy, I say absolutely. And it'll only get there if Māori have a successful economy. And with Māori having a successful economy, that means both our people, our whenua and moana will be looked after.